Great. This is my attempt at being a little humorous. I titled this talk Typography, What You Should Not Do. Does anyone recognize either of these typefaces? Yes, don't ever use them. So a little bit about me. I built my first commercial website in 1999. I've been hacking up WordPress since Stan Getz, that's WordPress 2.2. And this year, I proudly contributed to the core. I got my first patch accepted, so I'm a core contributor. I once built, my claim to fame is I once built a plugin live at a WordCamp, and Matt Mullenweg was in the audience. That was a little scary. When I'm not hanging out with dinosaurs, I manage the web presence and web team for the International Swaps and Derivatives Association. It's a financial organization in Midtown. I'd be amiss giving a talk on typography this week without mentioning the passing of Hermann Zapf. He passed away this past week. He's the designer of around 200 typefaces, including Optima, which is the primary font I chose to use for this presentation, as well as many others which you might have heard of, Zapfino, Palatino, etc. One of his students described his calling in life as to create beautiful letters, and he certainly left our world a more beautiful place. So what are we going to do today? My 10-point plan to wreck your site's fonts, and how to implement web typography in WordPress. So let's get started. Point number one, it's hard. Now I'm not saying this to discourage you from moving forward and trying to choose your own typefaces. I just want you to know when you're sitting there and you're tearing your hair out and you're trying to figure out which is the right font to choose for my site, what's the right one, you're in good company. One of the great typographers of the first half of the 20th century, W.A. Dwiggins, said, "What type shall I use? The gods refuse to answer. They refuse because they do not know." This slide I stole from a book called The Non-Designer's Design Book. And I'll have a link to it in the show notes. I'll have links to everything I mention here, so don't worry about taking notes. I'll post my slides on my website, and you can find everything here. So don't worry about trying to scribble everything down. This book, The Non-Designer's Design Book, if you're going to read anything on the subject, this is the book to start with. Point number two, typography exists to honor content. This is from a book on the other end of the spectrum. The book is called The Elements of Typographic Style. If you ever find yourself being sucked down the rabbit hole and you become obsessed with type, you'll eventually get to this book. But you can wait until you're ready to start laying out pages and actually typesetting books. It's very dense, but it's a fantastic book. So what does this mean? You will find that almost all the virtues of the perfect wine glass have a parallel in typography. There is the long, thin stem that obviates fingerprints on the bowl. Why? Because no cloud must come between your eyes and the fiery heart of the liquid. Are not the margins on the book pages similarly meant to obviate the necessity of fingering the type page? This is from an essay by Beatrice Ward. I'll also link to that as well. If you love wine, you're not going to want a big gold jewel-encrusted chalice to drink your wine from, because that'll distract you from the experience of drinking wine. You might want that chalice on, in your display case, but it's going to change the experience of drinking the wine and steal the show. Similarly, when you're choosing typefaces for your site, you don't want the typefaces you choose to steal the show. You want it to be a beautiful experience. Which brings us to point number three. If people aren't saying, "Oh, that was a pleasant read," you're doing it wrong. For the body text of your site choose something that's pleasant to read. After you choose something, take a step back, look at it, try to read the longest blog post and see, how does it look? How does it feel? Will people spend hours on my site? Because if they won't, you're going to have a problem and you're defeating the purpose. Point number 4. So you want to get in, where do you find all of these typefaces? Get out there and get dirty. This is the Flickr set of Aaron James Droplin. He's a brilliant designer. I could spend hours on his Flickr stream. And look where he gets his inspiration from. There's cans of engine oil and car ornaments. There's design and inspiration design everywhere. Open up magazines, see how they lay out their text. See what fonts they use. Look at other websites. And then, when you're ready, Typekit. I use this site to host the fonts that I use on my main site. Fonts.com, I've used this as well. It's also excellent. And Google Fonts. At the end of the show, I'll have slides that describe how you can include Typekit and Fonts.com and Google Fonts in your WordPress site, so don't stress about that. I'll get to it. Point number 5. Be wary of free fonts. Free often means you're paying for something in another way. Free fonts can be one of several things. It might be a generous foundry offering a high-quality font, but it might also just as easily be a knockoff font or an amateur designer that wanted to get their font out there. Now, what's missing from a knockoff font or an amateur font? Well, there's a lot of things that go into designing a font that you're probably not aware of. Does it scale well? Is it actually a vector? Will it be pixelated when it scales? The kerning. Every font, when a professional designer designs a font, they look at every single pairing of letters to see which letters go well together and at different sizes, so that that R and that Y look good there, and the O and F, they're not actually the same distance from each other as the O and the N, but a good font designer will make sure that the letters look good together on every scale. You're not going to get that in amateur fonts. Also, italics isn't just a letter form slanted, and bold isn't just a stroke around a letter form. And if you don't care about that, then you're in the wrong place right now, because you shouldn't be choosing for your fonts for your website if you don't care that you're using faux italics. But Google Fonts, when they first launched, it got a lot of flack for when they first launched. They included knockoff fonts and amateur fonts, and they got a lot of flack for that. However, since then, they and Adobe have invested quite a bit in the open source typography community, and so you can find a lot of high quality fonts on Google Fonts. Just be careful when it says free. You're not always, you might not always be getting the highest quality thing. This is from Fembot on her GitHub account. She has an incredible project that marries Aesop's Fables with Google Fonts, and you can see all these incredible examples of what you can do with Google Fonts. It's beautiful. Point number 6. Each typeface has a personality. When you're looking at a typeface, ask yourself, how does it make me feel? No, seriously, ask yourself, how does it make me feel? Not in a touchy-feely way. A font can be beautiful, or powerful, or friendly, or trustworthy, or modern. I stole this concept of this example from Ina Saltz. She gives a number of fantastic lectures on lynda.com. I highly recommend you go there and watch all of them. But when you're choosing fonts for your site, are you a financial organization? What sort of typeface will convey that? Or maybe you want something more, maybe you're an art house and you'll want a completely different font. Point number 7, never ever use Comic Sans. This is not cute and friendly. Don't use it. When I see this sign, I don't know if I should be weary of the lion or climb into the cage and cuddle up with it. You shouldn't even use Comic Sans here. There are plenty of other well-crafted comic fonts that you can use instead. A little bit of history on Comic Sans. It was originally designed for screens that had very low resolution. And when it was scaled, it wasn't scaled well. So don't use Comic Sans. How about Papyrus? Papyrus isn't a bad font per se. It's been overused. So if you want to be taken seriously, don't use Papyrus. We need to give it a rest for a decade or so. Times New Roman. Studies have shown that 99.9% of all resumes that go out use Times New Roman. It's not a good way to stand out. So don't use Times New Roman in your resumes. Don't use it on your website. Point number 8, stick to 2 fonts. Oh dear, when you use too many fonts, see how they all fight for attention? 1 font for your heading, 1 font for your body. That's it. If you want to use a 3rd font for accent, you can. I'll allow it. But that's it. No more. Point number 9, the 3 C's. So we're nearing the end. We talked about how to get inspiration, how to tell if a font is quality, but we said you should use 2 fonts. How do I know which 2 fonts can I use together? So the 3 C's help you decide. The first C is concordant. That means harmonious. Harmonious fonts can mean that they're from the same family, perhaps the same superfamily. Sometimes you can find concordant fonts from the same designer, but be careful of that. This is one font. It's Facet. It's from Just Another Foundry. And you can see what variation you can have with just one font, one single font. This isn't boring. So one font doesn't have to be boring. And it will be harmonious. C number 2, contrasting. Contrasting means they're so different, they look good. So self-plug here. Notice how with my heading, I'm using ratio for the heading. It's a big, bold sans serif. And then the body text is a more elegant serif font. I'm using Minion Pro for that. Let's go with one of the legends, A List Apart. This is Jeffrey Zeldman's site. Again, he has Franklin for the heading, and it's again a bold heading. It stands out. And then for the body text, he has Georgia at the bottom. You can see it's also it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. The third C is conflicting, and this is what you don't want. It's when 2 fonts are so similar they don't quite look good. You might have 2 sans serif fonts, and one's condensed and one isn't condensed. Or here, this is a more subtle variation. Notice the difference between the B's or the lowercase h's. The B in the title doesn't have a serif, even though it's a serif font. And in the body text, it has a serif there. And you might not notice it consciously, but it's like listening to music when one of the strings of the instrument is a little bit out of tune, and you're not going to, every so often, you're going to hear something's a little bit off. If you walk away from here with one thing, I want you to remember that the purpose of the typefaces on your site is to convey the message of your content and not the other way around. And if you detract from the content of your site, if you distract people by having conflicting fonts, you're missing the purpose. You're missing the point. Point number 10. So if you want to make sure that you have two fonts that look good together, be bold. Over here I have Lust for the header font, and then for the body I have Josephine. It's a nice, elegant read. You don't have to use sans serif for the body. Serif for the body. This is a nice sans serif. If you can't be bold, see point number 8, two fonts. But I'm going to qualify that by saying choose one serif and one sans serif. And if you choose one serif and one sans serif, you're reducing the opportunity to have conflicting fonts. Serifs are the little tags that are on letters, and sans serif are without. So that's the basic difference. Over here, this is an example. I'm using Franklin Gothic Condensed for the heading, and then for the body, I have Freight. It's, again, sans serif serif pairing over here. Or if you can't, have two different fonts, you can just use one font. I'm back to ratio here. There's a 200 weight on top and 400 weight on the bottom, and it looks interesting. If you're still unsure how to pair your fonts, then look online. This is from typography.com. This is the page for Obsidian. And it has in the bottom suggested pairings. Obsidian with Archer. Try Obsidian with Surveyor. Also, Google Fonts has pairings for your fonts. So you can find online, there's a lot of help out there. And what I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for, the code. How do you do this? I will have... I keep losing connection, sorry. I will have a link to the gist on the slides. But the basic concept, you take this code, you pop it into your functions.php. Typekit needs an enqueue script as well as WP action head action. Fonts.com only needs the enqueue script, and Google Fonts needs enqueue style. And you put this in your themes functions.php, and then you can use any of the fonts as you would in your CSS. Or you can host your own. Font Squirrel has a large selection of beautiful free fonts that you can download. And in order to include them on your site, you just upload them like you would your CSS or your JavaScript, and then you link to them like this in your style sheet. I generated this on Font Squirrel. They have a web fonts generator to make the bulletproof at font face that will work in all browsers. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
Yeah, a question for you on cost on these things. What I find with a lot of websites I'm working on, they've got such volume on them that by the time you're done putting something in, like from the Adobe stuff, it's like $300, $400 a month.
The question was, what about the cost? So the solutions that I posted, I use Typekit on my site because it's very cost efficient. It's also owned by Adobe, so there's this great selection there. I pay $4 or $5 a month, and that lets me include an unlimited amount of fonts on an unlimited amount of sites. There's a limit to page views, but I haven't hit that yet, so it's quite affordable.
What's the limit on it?
It's in the hundreds of thousands. So you can, it's $5 a month for several hundred thousand. If you're getting more than that, then you should be getting enough revenue to be able to bump yourself up a tier.
It's a question of whether the client wants to pay it or not.
I'm sorry?
It's a question of whether the client wants to pay it or not.
Yeah, well, that's something else. Google Fonts is free. Fonts.com has a free tier as well. Another question.
Is there a particular tool you use when you're on the web to identify which fonts are being used when you come across a compelling layout, or do you just go to source?
The question was, how do you identify a font on the web when you come across an interesting font? Built into all modern browsers is something called Inspect Element. On some browsers, you have to enable it. But when you right-click on any element on a web page, there's an option called Inspect Element, and it opens up a window in your browser or detached from your browser, where it will show you on one side all of the source, the HTML source. On the other side, it shows you the CSS. And you can click the Computed tab, and it'll show you which font family is being used. And do this everywhere. This is the best way to learn how people do things. You can see how do they style the CSS. CSS can't be obfuscated. It can be condensed, but it can't be obfuscated like JavaScript. So you can learn a lot from looking at other people's websites and just inspect element.
There's also
Chrome Developer Tools. That's what I'm referring to. You access it also by doing inspect element. Question.
There's a couple of nice little bookmarklet things. One's called a type sample, and another one's called a fount, I think. But you can just kind of click those in your top bar thing and highlight, and then it'll tell you what font. So that's like,
awesome.
for just fonts, not like CSS.
Awesome. Yes.
I had put a Google font on my site at one point, and it added a lot of latency because it was going from my server to Google server back to mine. Is there a workaround for that?
The question is, sometimes when you include fonts on your site, it can add a lot of latency. So one thing, what you have to keep in mind when choosing fonts is that. That's another reason why you don't want to use more than 2 fonts. And also be aware, when you're including fonts, you don't have to include the entire font family. You can choose just one subset of that. So you can just choose the regular and italic, or 2. Typekit will have built in, it tells you how big the package that you will be delivering will be, and it even warns you if it's more than half a megabyte.
Where would you designate that you just want the non-italic?
I don't remember how to do it in Google Fonts, but I'm sure there's a way. If you want, you can meet me afterwards. Give me your email, and I'll be happy to look it up for you. Or you can go to the help desk, and I'm sure someone there can help you as well. But Typekit, it has it as part of the selection process. Yes?
If you're not a coder, is there a place where you can get specific directions for how to integrate it into, or I do HTML, I'm not just familiar with PHP.
The question was, if you're not a coder, is there a way to include it? I seem to remember in my exploration there are a few plugins that you can use, and you just pop your code in there and it will include it for you. If I can look it up and add it to the slides before I post it to my site.
What is your site?
JackReichert.com. It's just my name. I have a link in, I think, the description as well. So just myname.com. So you can look it up. Any other questions? Yes?
I had a client who wanted to use the new version of Helvetica Canoe, and it was kind of confusing. There was different companies selling it and for different pricing configurations, and they wanted to know the price, and it was so complicated because it was depending on what company you bought it from, how many hits it got, and all that stuff. Is there anything you suggest that's a good value if you're a single developer?
The question was, when including fonts on your site, when you find fonts that you want to use on your site, sometimes they can be very expensive, or the price can vary from one foundry to another. So one thing to be aware of is there are different licenses for a font. And it could be that the font licenses you're looking at from one site to another, one will include print licenses as well as web licenses. Another will include just print licenses. Another will include web licenses. And this is something to be aware of in general. Even if you're using free fonts, free font might not give you the license to use that font in your printing materials or vice versa. So that would be the first thing I'd look at, which licenses are included, because that can significantly reduce the cost or fee. Another option is there are people that will suggest alternatives to fonts. If you want to use Helvetica New and it's unaffordable, try using this instead. Okay. Yes?
Sorry, one question. Maybe this is no longer a consideration. It used to be you have to put in a number of fonts, right, for a browser that didn't support certain fonts. Is that no longer an aspect of...
The question was whether you have to put fallback fonts as well. That is a best practice. It still is a best practice. If you're serving fonts, if something goes wrong with the connection between your browser and the place that's serving the fonts, you want an elegant fallback. So it's a good idea in general, and there are sites that will suggest font stacks for most fonts out there. Okay, I'll be available in the back. Thank you very much.